Hey everybody, welcome back to Weekend Watch Repair. My name is Adam. Today's project is the next watch in our series of budget vintage rebuilds. This is a Dufonte by Lucian Piccard. I'm probably mispronouncing that. I bought this watch on eBay for what I think is an absolute bargain. I paid $45 for this watch. And as you can tell, it looks like a $45 watch right now. It's dirty and filthy, and you saw that crystal was heavily cracked. But I've had a little bit of experience with these Dufonte watches in the past, the older ones, and I think they're really undervalued. The brand, you know, had a pretty good reputation originally, and then it got bought out, and then a million different things happened, and the quality went down, and so the prices for a lot of them have gone down. But if you can get, an older one, they used to make some pretty solid darn watches, and I this one here's in that category. So, doing initial inspection, when you pull the crown out to the first position or the middle position, that is actually where you set the time on this watch. And there should be a semi quick set for the day. So, I'm checking that right now. And that actually seems to work okay. So, I'm going to wind it backwards again and kind of go past about 9 o'clock and then wind it back forward again. And we'll see where the rollover happens here. Right about 5 minutes after midnight, which isn't bad. And then if you pull the crown out all the way, where normally where you'd set the time on a watch, that is where the quick set for the date is. But on this watch, that is not working. It feels completely free. I mean, it doesn't feel like it's engaging anything. So I'm going to go ahead and push the crown in and pull it back out again and just double check it one more time. I actually moved it to the middle position. So pull it all the way out and I just check it again one more time. And yeah, there's definitely something going on here. I should feel something, and it just feels like it's just spinning in there completely free and not, engaging anything. But this watch here, I'm hopeful you'll like the transformation on this watch. When I got it, this is the kind of watch that I really like to get my hands on. This kind of project where, I when I'm getting these for myself, and one of the reasons I wanted to get into watch repair, not just to service my own watches, but also want to, restore projects for myself, something like this. And, this thing here can be bought really, really inexpensively. I think almost criminally inexpensively for the value that you get for what's in it. But, I knew when I got, ordered this watch, it had a stainless steel case. So I knew if I needed to do some casework on it, that I can get away with a lot more than I could if it was rather than if it was just plated. And yeah, take a look at that case back there. It looks like they've ground down maybe an original serial number, something, and put something else in it. That looks like something done at a factory, but I don't know what the purpose of that is for. So we'll get back to what I was saying earlier here in a minute, but I want to show you this balance. I couldn't get a good time grapher reading. And if we zoom in on this balance, check this hairspring out. You can see those outer coils are not moving at all. It's just kind of sitting there, and we'll zoom in here and just take a look, and you could definitely see, they're touching, actually. See how they're touching the underside of the balance cock? It absolutely positively should not be doing that. So that's why we couldn't really get a time grapher reading on this thing. My first thought when I saw that is that it was magnetism. And so what I'm going to do here is I'll just show you how I check for magnetism. I've used a compass. I got this little app on my phone. It's a free app. And as you can see, we got magnetism. So I took it over to my demagnetizer and I just zapped it a couple times. I originally had, one of those little blue ones you can get off Amazon or whatever. And I've still got it. It's the one where you got to put the movement on it and then hold it down, power it up and then pull the watch away. I ended up buying this, and it's not inexpensive, but it's the cheap version of a really nice one, but it works really well. So we got rid of the magnetism, but unfortunately, that did not solve our problem. It's still in there. And another thing that can cause that is if there's, oil or something on the hairspring. So not much we can do about it right now. We're just going to go ahead and work on taking this movement apart. And we'll address that balance, after we pull it out and we inspect it and we see what's going on with it. On this oscillating weight, it's kind of got a unique clip that kind of holds it on. So we'll show you that here in a second. After I pull this off, there's two screws holding this automatic assembly down, and we need to get this removed before we can remove power from the watch. It won't let us unwind it if that automatic works is in there. So with those two screws pulled out, this just lifts off pretty easily. We'll take a look here, and that should look pretty familiar if you've watched a couple of my previous videos, or if you're familiar with a lot of the Swiss style movements that reverser wheel setup for the automatic works. And we will depress the setting lever stud, and we can pull the crown out. That actually works just like a bunch of the Seiko movements that we've done on this channel. Now that that's out, we'll go ahead and pull the movement ring out. And we can go ahead and get this watch out of the case. Take a look at this dial for the first time without that busted up crystal in front of it. And that actually looks pretty darn nice. They don't make, at least I don't see a lot of new watches today with really, with dials like that. I don't know what it is. You can always tell an old watch, man, they just look different. And in my opinion, these do it for me a lot more than most of the newer stuff, with a few exceptions. But in order to remove the dial, there are two dial feed screws that we need to loosen up. And those just, when they're screwed in, they put pressure down on the dial feet that go through the movement, go through the main plate. And then with those loose, we can just lift that dial off. And on the underside of this dial, there is a dial ring. And that's got a little channel kind of cut into it that fits in the channel on the main plate. But now, in order to remove this day wheel, there is the world's tiniest little clip. See that blue steel clip right in the middle of that? That thing is unbelievably small. I was really worried that I was going to lose it, so I had to put plastic on it just to make sure I didn't lose that thing. But with that off, we'll go ahead and pull this day wheel off. And I'll tell you a little bit about this movement as you watch me take it apart. We'll go into some of the details during the assembly on what certain things do. But this movement is from FHF. It's an FHF 908. And it's a Swiss-made movement. FHF was actually the first manufacturer of ébauche movements, meaning bear movements that, they make them bear. They sell them to watch companies and they put their logo on them. They may modify one or two things or something and then put them in their watches. And that still happens a lot today. Really common. And that doesn't necessarily make them bad movements at all. A lot of them are really, really nice movements. But this was, FHF was founded in 1793. And from my research, it showed that they began industrial production of ébauche movements in 1916, which is pretty incredible considering, there's 100 and something years of them being just a small time operation and not going in the industrial route. But, and as we do this, I'll chime in on a few certain things during disassembly here. One of them coming up here, I'm going to put an arrow. See that date jumper? I bumped the date wheel with my tweezers. That date jumper just flew off. It didn't fly far, but I felt it was worth pointing that out. But FHF, they've been around for a very long time. There's doing some research on FHF and the history of it. There is so much that there's no way I'd have to write a report and then study and all that to remember all the details, because it just goes on, and all the different changes and stuff this company went through, and joining conglomerates and all that stuff, and it's incredible. But the main things are that, so this company in 1926 this company, along with AMSA and A Child, which we've actually had an A Child movement on the channel before, they formed a company called Ebushes SA or ESH, which was kind of like the first, I don't want to say conglomerate, but that kind of thing. They it formed shortly after World War One, where there was a lot of disorganization and a lot of competing companies, and because of that, prices started dropping, and then companies started going out of business. So they started to consolidate, and ESH was one of the companies that did that. They were a founding member of another of a larger conglomerate called ASAUG, and then that joined with another conglomerate called SSIH, which later became long story short, after years and years and a bunch of other things and having 75 different movement manufacturers and other watch companies and everything else, that became ETA and Swatch. And I'm sure most of y'all have probably heard that. And that's kind of the elephant in the room when they're talking about watch conglomerates today. But this FHF is the oldest company that was originally part of that conglomerate, and was one of the three founding members of what became ASAUG and then subsequently Swatch. So pretty interesting story on this. I mean, there is so much reading. I found a couple websites that detailed certain things, and they had timelines with 70 and 80 different things on them. I said, there's no way I'm going to remember all that stuff. So, I found it interesting to read for sure. But, in that story is the story of Eterna, which ETA was the movement wing of Eterna. And then, Eterna got brought into the group. And then since they have the patents and they came out with the first automatic watch movement, there's some history on, even when automatics were becoming quite common, there were still several companies that, due to the active patent, couldn't make an automatic watch. And then there's, some of the same history on the Swiss lever escapements too, but it's really interesting about what certain companies did during that time. There are certain companies that made pin pallet escapements long after Swiss levers had become the standard. But back to here, we took this balance out and take a look at all this oil on the underside of that balance cock. And then holding it here, you can see how that spring is kind of held in there. I mean, it looks bent almost, and I'm kind of hoping it's not, but all the rings on it look pretty concentric. So I didn't want to, I'm not going to take it apart. I'm just going to run it through a very thorough cleaning first. And I'm hopeful that is just oil and dirty hairspring causing it to stick to the underside of that balance cock. So we'll cross our fingers, but we'll also cross that bridge when we come to it. And you'll see later if that actually worked or not. But kind of give you a little bit of a backstory on FHF. It's a a movement company with a really long history, and which 100 plus years of that, it was very small and, very local, but it became something that's just dominating today. So it's pretty interesting. But this movement here is a really well put together movement. And one of the things I was saying earlier was, Dufonte and Lucian Piccard, and they got this reputation. If you go online and look at, just old Dufonte watches on eBay, they're not going to bring that much. And a lot of them, quite honestly, are probably only worth what those people are asking for it. But that brand has a history where in its earlier years, before, all that changeover happened and they started, putting less quality components in the watches and just using the name, for the sake of making a sale, these watches actually, this is a good sturdy Swiss movement in this thing. Well engineered. All the pieces are fitting together real nice. I mean, you can just tell it's finished real nice. It's a great little movement. And considering this watch only costs $45, I mean, it's ridiculous. So I'm again really pleased with, this being it is a budget watch, but it's amazing value for that low price. So back to the disassembly here. Saw us take apart quite a lot of stuff here. This here is the click spring assembly. We got the spring and the screw out, and there's the click itself. And before I take the bridge off, I'm just going to go ahead and check in shake on this barrel. And that actually looks fantastic. I read somewhere, and I think I said it on one video before, but I was, when I was first starting watch repair, one of the more difficult things that I found was judging, what is the correct amount of in shake on a barrel, or on, in shake or side shake on, the wheel train. Does the escape wheel need to have the same amount of in shake as the center wheel, and all these things? And, there's not a lot of consistent published data on that, but, there is forums and with a lot of helpful people. But one of the things I remember reading was someone had said on the barrel, they said, you need, regarding in shake, you need as little as possible, but some. And that seemed like a really, really, for some reason, that just clicked with me, where I just understood it when they put it that way. And, as I've done more and more, and just, you kind of start to get a feel for it just by going through a number of watches. You start to see, oh, well, that's good and that's not. And I really wish there was something more concrete to say, this is too much or this is too little. But you really only learn it by doing it. And then you'll see it on your time grapher later and in your troubleshooting. And you'll say, well, maybe this is too much in shake. And you'll tighten that up. And then boom, all of a sudden that watch comes alive and starts running great. And that's how I learned. And, a couple of people have asked, well, how did you get into watch repair? And to be really honest with you, it's something I've always been intrigued by, but I never considered learning how to do it myself. I didn't even know where to begin. And one day I just happened to be on YouTube, and I came across a wristwatch revival video. And I saw him take that watch apart, and I was mesmerized, as I'm sure many of you were too. And he does great videos. And so I watched a few of them, and then I started to pick up the pattern of, after 10 videos in, I started to pick up a pattern. Oh, this is what part's coming next, and this and this and this. And then on one video, he mentioned Mark Lovick. And so I went to that website, and I ended up signing up for his courses, and I just started from there. And I have learned a lot from people on YouTube. There is, there's a couple channels that I haven't seen them put out a lot of videos anymore. And, and they were professionals. And I love old Seikos. If you've watched my channel, there's, there's no shortage of Seiko watches. There is a couple of people, and there's still one really active one today where, they are true experts, and learned a lot from them. And so, that kind of led me down a rabbit hole. I started finding other channels, and then I found, the My Retro Watches channel. And I found, Naked Watchmaker was the other giant one that I found pretty early on. And then there's a host of other ones, and, CS Spinner, I think his name is Chris Spinner, and he does a lot of old watches, and I'm amazed by what he does. And there's several others, and I've never met any of these folks. They don't even know I exist. I'm like this tiny, minuscule fish in this giant ocean. But, it was the inspiration to kind of, all right, fine, I'm going to start off, and I'm going to buy a cheap set of tools and a cheap watch and take it apart and put it together. And of course, I'm destroyed that watch, but it didn't dissuade me. And, it just kind of went on from there. And I, started taking Mark's courses, and then studying stuff. I read books, and then it just evolved until I was doing this pretty regularly. And, I kind of have somewhat of an addictive personality, and I'm kind of a technical guy. So it seemed like a pretty good fit. And this ended up being a way for me to kind of wind down, once the day is over and the house is quiet. And, I can kind of go into this little corner of the house and work on a watch. And it was almost therapeutic. But it kind of grew from there, and I did some friends' watches, which made me just unbelievably nervous working on a watch that wasn't my own. But started doing some friend watches, and then one guy had asked me. I was working on a watch of his, and it was family heirloom of his. And he'd asked me, "Hey, would you mind making a video?" And I was not. I didn't have. I knew absolutely nothing about making videos. I still barely know anything, but I didn't have what I needed, and it kind of went on from there. And then I finally just kind of caved, and I got a camera, and it was rough, but I mean, he enjoyed it. He was really appreciative, and I'm my own worst critic, and I thought the video was atrocious. But it's different for him because it's his family's watch. But it kind of went on from there. So one point here, I'm not going to take that center stud out of that automatic bridge. There's really no need, so I just figured I'd mention that. But it just kind of went on from there. So I eventually took the plunge and just decided to start putting them on YouTube, and it kind of reinvigorated the entire hobby. Although I wasn't bored of it, but it added a new level of a new challenge. Not only am I learning as I go on these watches, because again, I'm not a professional, but I'm also learning how, videography and, all these different things. So it's been really interesting and fun to learn and to do these videos. And hopefully they've improved a little bit as I've moved along. And, again, I'm just this guy in the middle of nowhere. I got a day job, do my own thing, and then work on watches at night or on the weekend, upload an occasional video. And it means a lot that, some people out there enjoy watching them. And I get feedback, and sometimes you forget that it's real people watching these videos and leaving comments. And I get some emails every now and again, and just from the nicest people telling me these incredible stories. And it's just been this really rewarding thing that I never anticipated it becoming. So I appreciate y'all watching and coming along for the ride with me. But now that we got this watch all torn apart and you saw me put it into the cleaning basket, this here is my Elma cleaner. And, if it's not obvious from before and me saying I'm an amateur, this cleaner is way more than what I need. It's not a cheap machine, but it's the cheap version of a really expensive machine. But this is one wash cycle, 3 rinse cycles, and then a drying cycle. And then kind of like an all-in-one thing. And I've actually got I have an old L&R cleaner that I still have, but that thing there is just unbelievably nice to have. But after that thing comes out of the cleaner, I got the jewels clean on the balance, and I'm going to go ahead and assemble and lubricate these. Once I get them put together, I'll just use my automatic oiler, and it'll drop a little dab of 9010 on that capstone, and capillary action will actually hold that capstone and that setting together and keep them from separating. We'll go ahead and get this installed in there. And I'd like to take this opportunity actually just to say thank you to my patrons. Again, I was really hesitant to make a Patreon page to begin with. It wasn't in the works, but, someone, convinced me to do it and just said, let the people support the channel if they want. So I did. Some people have signed up, and it's been fantastic. And I really appreciate it. If you'd like to take a look, the information's on my description of the video. There's a link. Everything that goes into that goes into this channel, 100% of it. This watch was actually purchased with funds from Patreon. So, and actually a part that while I was rambling on about the FHF history, I completely didn't talk about the Quickset and why it wasn't working. Some of you with a keen eye may have caught and saw why that Quickset for the date didn't function. I'll go into detail on it when we put it together, and I'll show you. But the problem was visible when we were taking apart the keyless works. There was a part completely missing. But again, thanks everyone. Thank you, patrons. This has been a really rewarding thing. I'm sure glad you're along with me on the ride, and hope we can just continue to move along and do more watches. And I'm really enjoying the conversations I'm having with y'all, and I just appreciate everyone who goes over there and takes a look. Just thanks again. So as you can see, that hairspring now is running like a champ, and it indeed was oil causing that dirty hairspring, and it was causing it to stick to the underside of that balance cock. But here I'm just checking the flatness of it just to make sure it all looks good. I had to adjust the position of the regulator pins a little bit. I found it's basically impossible to do that on camera. And I'm making sure that impulse jewel in there is in good alignment with the pallet fork and escape wheels. So here is the barrel, and we're going to put some braking grease on the walls of this barrel since it's an automatic watch. There's little notches you see there on those barrel walls. What I'm doing is I'm placing them to the left side of each of those notches in this view. And then we're going to go ahead and put a little bit of oil down here. And that original mainspring actually looked really good. I was rambling on about something else when I was showing you that, but that mainspring looked good, so we're going to reuse it. And the reason I put that braking grease on the sides of those, since this mainspring here winds to the right, I put them on that side of those notches. So that way, when the spring grabs that grease and begins to move it, it's not going to just push it all into that little groove, but just it'll coat the walls evenly. So that went in, and we go ahead and put this arbor in, and that went in unbelievably nice. It didn't fight me at all. I just give it a little twist just to make sure that arbor hook is set in there with the mainspring. We'll go ahead and put this cap on, and then we can go ahead and tighten the lid up on this thing and just get it closed all the way. This is just a cheap little tool that does just that. You don't have to have one of these, but I mean, this tool was like $6, so I figured why not? And it's definitely just handy to have. But then once this is done, what I like to do is hold it under the microscope. It doesn't really give a lot of context. Right here, it looks like I'm just holding it there, but I'm looking at it under the microscope and I'm checking it at different angles just to make sure that lid is seated completely flush all the way around and closed fully. We also want to assemble the automatic works, where I like to get all the sub-assemblies put together before I build the watch. So this Lubetta V105 is a lubricant for the reversing wheels. And what that is, it's a 33-to-1 mixture of IPA and 100% IPA and basically 90-10. And you submerge those wheels in there and get them kind of saturated in that solution, and then dry them off with a puff of air. And then once you get both of them dried off with a puff of air, you need to leave them covered for about 10 to 15 minutes on a non-reactive surface, a piece of paper or something that won't react to that IPA. So that's why I'm going to leave them on the paper, and then I'll just cover them with the parts tray cover and leave them for about 15 minutes. And that IPA will evaporate and leave a very, very, very thin coat of that 90-10 all over that. And there's some cams inside those reversing wheels. And that's really what it's lubricating. And there's a way to manually lubricate those things. I've never had the courage to even try it. So I just use that lubricant, follow the instructions on it, and it seems to work just fine. So here we got the reduction wheel in first, and then the transmission wheel. And now we got the two reversing wheels in. And now I can fumble around. You can watch me fumble around and try to put this bridge on here. It took me a minute to get everything lined up. There's 4 pivots on there, but there it goes. Then I'm going to just spin that transmission wheel, and you can saw that left reversing wheel spun. So everything's kind of in place there. 2 screws holding this down. And I'll go ahead and just do a final tighten on them. And again, these are not very complicated. You just have to be really make sure that you are cleaning and lubricating those reversing wheels properly. Otherwise, they can cause you some problems. And since there's 4 wheels on this, there are 8 pivots that we have to lubricate. So I decided to give my microscope a little bit of a workout because it's been angry with me because I haven't been using it a lot in the videos. So we'll do a couple microscope shots here, but a couple non-microscope shots too, because you kind of lose perspective on how small that is, I find, if I just do them on all the microscope on all of them. But oiling each of these, no big deal. And then this pivot here on that transmission wheel, that's going to go into a jewel on the watch when we install it later. So I'm just kind of pre-lubricating that. But now all the sub-assemblies are done, so we can go ahead and put this watch together. And we're going to start off with our center wheel. So I'm pre-lubricating the bottom side of that. And we don't have to do that. We can lubricate it from the other side of the watch, but I've just always done it that way. And then this thing has its own bridge, which I'm going to pre-lubricate the top of this wheel first. There we go. You can see capillary action actually pull that lubrication around. And here we go. And there's a bridge. And I have been informed that the terminology between like a bridge and a cock is if there's 2 screws holding it down, it's called a bridge. But I also think I've seen 2 screws on pallet fork bridges, but a bridge spans across the part, and the cock it kind of sticks out and holds it down without going all the way across it. So I guess technically that is a center wheel bridge. Now there's this plate here, and that separates the fourth wheel is going to go in there and then go through that plate and then through the second wheel. And I'm checking in shake just to make sure while I don't have anything else in here. That in shake looks fantastic on that second wheel. So go ahead and put our barrel in. Just give it a quick test. I mean, there's really nothing to go wrong here, but just do it. Tests out fine. And now we can put the wheel train together. And that begins with the escape wheel on this particular one. That escape wheel just kind of fell right into place. Unlike this third wheel, I have to mess with it here for a minute, but eventually you'll kind of see it sit down a little bit deeper. Right there. I'm going to lubricate the pivot on there where it's going to, the bearing surface on that pivot where it's going to go down in there, and just get that done now. And then we can drop that fourth wheel into place. Just like that. Pretty easy training wheels, well engineered. Then we have this plate. There we go. That sat down pretty well, and we're going to go ahead and give this thing a tap, vibrate it a little bit, and hopefully all those pivots find their home. Lately, I've been running 50-50 on these in the last couple of videos. But, and more often than not, I have better luck on the Japanese movements, the Seikos and whatnot. But this one here, as you can see, that was one shot, and that worked like a charm. So I'm putting in these screws, and I'm getting them all the way down, but I'm not tightening them at all. And between each one, I'm actually just double checking and spinning that train wheel bridge just to make sure that it's all, still there. Nothing's moved or anything. And then once I get them all in and a good test, I'll go ahead and tighten these down properly. It looks like I'm really cranking on the screws. I'm not, but I do have some shaky hands. You probably saw, especially earlier on in the video, I had super shaky hands. Clearly I had not eaten in a while. But we're going to go ahead and lubricate this top barrel arbor. You see that oil get pulled down in there. We'll get that done now, because once we put that ratchet wheel on, we won't be able to access that any longer. And then we'll just clean up my mess a little bit. And now I'm going to use some heavier grease here for the ratchet wheel. This is a really high friction spot. And even though there's a little bit of marking on the plate, on the bridge plate, where you can tell, there's been some rubbing involved. I just want to make sure I use a heavy grease here and just put a little bit down on the top side of that plate as well. We'll put our ratchet wheel on. Here we go. And then I'm going to fumble around and do a pretty sloppy job of applying grease until I finally, figure out what I'm doing. But yeah, it just kept the whole footage in there just so you can kind of see I fiddled with it for a minute. But then we'll put this center plate on here and put our reverse threaded screw back on. And on this one here, this one's, like a couple others, they're not always marked. The screw head doesn't always have 3 slots on it if it's a reverse threaded screw. So, but generally speaking, if you're doing a ratchet wheel, I always loosen it by turning it to the right by default. But the last thing you want to do is break it. So just whichever way you go, if you're testing it, just be very careful. Now we can put on our click in. And in this one here, it's much easier to put the spring in after the fact. So we get our click screwed down into place. And now we'll just seat that one side of the click spring underneath the click assembly itself. And I'll just hold it down with my tool here and then put it into place. And I'm just going to be very careful. I've actually lost more than one spring in my experience by just lifting it up too quickly. So I'm very, very careful now, lifting my tools away from those springs, those and yoke springs and everything else. I've took my lumps on those for sure. This is the ratchet wheel. You saw that square slot where it engages with that, that's what grabs that barrel arbor and will wind that spring. And we got to hold that ratchet wheel steady and brace it so we can tighten down the screw fully. And now we can just give this a tiny little turn here. Just one more time. And I'm just making sure that everything's looking pretty good. I've checked in shake a few times along the way, but now this is final assembly. You know, I don't plan on taking it apart again. So I'm just doing one final check here just to make sure that everything is looking good. And so far, I mean, yeah, no problems on this. I didn't have to make any adjustments. So now we're down to the pallet fork. We're going to go ahead and get this put in. And I've had kind of bum luck lately, but that one dropped right into place. Normally, I've had to fight with them a little bit on the last couple watches, both on video and not on video. But that one there was just beautiful. So we'll get the bridge, or I guess the cock, put on here. And then on the microscope, now you can see where that pivot is now in that jewel. So that's exactly what we're looking for. And I'm going to screw this down, but not torque it. And I'm just going to double check it one more time. Just make sure that's moving freely and nothing's moved. And then I can put that tiniest little turn on it just to torque that screw down. I mean, that's it. That's all it needs. Now I'm going to put a little bit of wind in the watch because I just want to check the pallet fork engagement. I'm going to check its lock depth and just to make sure that, you know, it's transferring energy, it's locking and unlocking, and that everything's working like it should, which I did. And now we can do the escape lubrication. So that is Mobius 9415. So put a tiny dab of that on the escape jewel, or exit jewel rather, excuse me. And on this one here, this is another one. Most of these we do, there's 15 teeth on this escape wheel. So I'm applying that lubrication to 5 teeth at a time. And you can actually see that lubrication on the escape wheel tooth as it moves past. You can kind of see it soak it up a little bit. And we'll do one more here. Trying to do some people may even say that's too much. And they may be right. But I'm trying to do as little amount of grease as possible, actually. But we get that on 5 teeth and one more tooth. There we go. And I'm just cleaning up. There was a tiny, tiny, tiny bit on the top side of that exit stone. So I'm just taking care of that. It may not even hurt anything, but I'm just doing it. Now we can do our balance. So I kind of get this into place and turn it around. And I kind of got lucky there. That was almost as lucky as the very first video I ever did on YouTube, where I actually dropped the balance. I was so nervous. And I dropped it, and boy, it dropped right into place and fired right up. And that one there, it was almost like that. But, you know, when we took a look at that impulse jewel and made sure it was in line with the pallet fork and escape wheel jewels, you know, and trying to minimize what beat air we had, you saw that thing fired right up. So we have very minimal beat air, which is great because that thing just didn't fight us at all. It fired right up. And now we can go ahead and lubricate the train wheel. So we did the rear side, and we're just lubricating a couple on the dial side, the only ones we haven't done, which are the escape wheel and the third wheel. Everything else we've already lubricated. And then we need to do our lower barrel arbor itself. So there's some HP 1300 right in there. And there's another good shot of that oil just getting soaked up in there. But there we go. That thing's looking pretty good. And I'm going to go ahead and just double check it one more time now that this thing's running, and it's not just running on a puff of air, but it's actually running. Just taking a look at this hairspring again one more time. I'm double checking the regulator pins as well and making sure that you know, everything's in there and good. That is, you can see that impulse jewel swinging back and forth. That amplitude by eyeball looks great. So this is not actually at 24 hours. This is at about at 18 or 19 hours. Very quick regulation. Again, and then right now this is only dial down. And I'll preface this by saying this is not the final numbers. This is just getting me in the ballpark of where I know this watch is going to be. And that's actually amazing numbers. I mean, amplitude 290s gets up to 300. Timekeeping is pretty steady. The beat air is negligible. That's only step one in, 10 steps of regulating a watch. But that just kind of gets me in the ballpark, lets me know how this watch is doing. And if there is a problem, we can fix it. But while that thing's just running in, I went ahead and did some work on the case. And I put way too much Loctite down there. but I had to pull the pendant tube out, or the crown tube out of the case when I was just kind of buffing it, and it was just in the way. So I'm putting it back in, and these are friction fit, press fit in. So I'm putting some blue Loctite down there. That is not permanent Loctite. It can be removed. Heating it up makes it easier, but putting some of that in, and I'm sorry, it's kind of barely off camera here, and I finally realized that. And there we go. And I'll move it over here to this little tool that has not made an appearance on the channel yet. I don't use this often, but this is the tool. It's got two different ends on it, depending upon whether or not you want to push a tube out or seat one back in. So we're seating this tube back in, and it's just going to squeeze it down. And there you go. And you can see that little blue ring at the bottom of that, and that's some of that Loctite. So that case is going to go back into the cleaners. It's kind of filthy right now, but I did the best I could on that. I polished up some. I did everything but break out sandpaper on it, but I spent a good amount of time with some cutting compound and all that. All the corners were already rounded, if there were even more corners to begin with. I don't even know on that watch. So, but you'll see that in more detail later. So now we can begin assembly of the dial side of the movement, finally. So I put the setting lever in, and this red arrow is pointing to where that missing part I referenced earlier is for the Quickset. Just completely gone. So I'm going to lubricate the posts for the yoke and the intermediate wheel, and then clean up a little bit there. But I'm not going to put in that missing part just yet. The way it mounts onto the stem, it can come out. If you pull the stem out, the part can just fall out. The stem is the only thing that holds it in. So I'm actually going to wait to install that until the very end when I put the stem in for the final time. But for right now, you saw me lubricate the winding pinion and with some of that blue heavy grease. And now we're doing the same thing with the sliding clutch as well. And we'll go ahead and put those in together. And that's probably the highest friction in a watch is right there between those two parts, or among the highest friction. So I'm lubricating the stem, and I do a poor job at it because I missed a few things, which I will detail here in a moment, but you'll get to watch me fumble. I'm having a hard time putting the stem in from this angle. And I think it was the knob on that movement holder kind of getting in my way. But at first I think, well, I'll pull this setting lever out. Maybe that's what's causing it. But no, I still have issues. And then it just compounds, and the movement comes loose from the case, and it just turns into this big old mess. So I'll just keep it in the video here just because it's honest. But, when it's off the movement holder, that stem goes in there just fine. So I pull it out, and I'm just going to put it in one more time just to make sure that it is going in there properly. There is no issues. The issue is me and not the watch. And that's exactly what the issue was. That stem went in just fine. So I'm mounting it back on the movement holder a little bit differently, and I'm putting some grease here. Those little flats are where that missing Quickset gear is going to sit on those flats. So a little bit of grease there, and then a little bit more grease where the setting lever engages. I missed that when I was lubricating the stem earlier. So that was me. And then I'm still a big hot mess at this point, as you can see by my terrible attempt to install the setting lever back on the watch. And I could have just said, you know what? I'm just going to pull it out, take 5 minutes away, and then come back level-headed and then put it in all smooth, and I could edit the video that way. You'd never know. But that was my mindset right there. I was just fumbling with it. But a little bit of more heavy grease there on the edge of that setting lever where it's going to engage with the yoke, and then a little bit more on the sliding clutch here where it's going to engage with the yoke as well. Now we can go ahead and install our yoke. And again, we pre-lubricated that post that it sits on a little bit earlier, along with the intermediate wheel, which we'll do here in a bit. It's not going to come up for a moment. So on the sidewall of the main plate is where one side of that setting lever spring is going to go. So I just put a touch of grease there, and we can go ahead and put our setting lever spring in. And then I do a pretty poor job of, I attempt to lubricate the spring right there. You can see what I get for my efforts. But I fumble with it for a minute until I actually get grease in the right spot. And now we can actually go in and set that spring into place. So we'll Press it down into place with our hold down tool, and then just using my tweezers here to put tension on that spring and get it on the side of that yoke. There we go. Now I'm just going to be real careful, hold it down with my tweezers, make sure the other end of that spring is in there completely and seated all the way down, and then just very carefully pull my tools away and thank the Almighty that it didn't fly off. Now we can put a little bit more grease on the back side of this, of the setting lever, where the setting lever spring is going to go. Speaking of the spring, we'll get that down, and I'm going to put a little bit of grease there on that spring as well, where it's going to engage with that setting lever itself. I actually missed one spot on there. I greased the two little indentations on that, but when you pull the crown out to the third position, it actually goes on the other side of that inwardmost slot. I'll grease that later. I didn't catch that at first. I didn't catch it until I started testing the keyless works after we, got everything tightened down, but you'll see me lubricate that here in a minute. And we'll go ahead and tighten the screw down, and that part finally just there it goes. Finally set down properly. I caught that and made sure everything was okay. And then when I realized it was, I'll go ahead and tighten the screw down. And then I'm putting a little bit more grease there where the yoke and the setting lever meet. I didn't like how little there was. Just doing a quick test. Then I also realized right there, yep, a little bit more grease on the back side of that deal on the setting lever spring. And then I'll just clean it up with some Rodico. Pretty straightforward keyless works. The only issues I had on it were of my own doing. Now we're going to put some of the heavy grease on the cannon pinion, or on the center wheel shaft, so we can install our cannon pinion. Those are friction fit. It kind of gives a real affirmative, positive click. And there's some lubrication for the minute wheel. And we're just going to make sure that the teeth on that minute wheel are engaged with the cannon pinion. Everything looks good. So these two posts that we're going to lubricate here are for the calendar works. That's the intermediate wheel. And then this here is the calendar driving wheel. And that calendar driving wheel actually has the day and the date drivers on it as well. That is our intermediate wheel on the post we pre-lubricated. And that one had a radius cut on one side, and that side went down. And on there, I'll kind of show you some detail on that driving wheel here in a minute. That one's got a safety mechanism kind of built into it to make sure it doesn't damage anything when you wind your watch backwards to do the semi-quick set for the day. That little plastic nub that's on the left side of that wheel actually is spring loaded, and it'll push inwards. So that way, when you're winding the watch backwards, it doesn't damage that tooth or the wheel. And some watches, that can happen to you. So we'll do a close-up shot of that. There we lubricated and installed our hour wheel, and we're putting our screw in here for this intermediate wheel. There is our date wheel. This is a really well made. This is a pretty robust date wheel, I have to say. And a little bit of lubrication here where the day jumper is going to go. Right there. Microscope gets to get another shot. There's our day jumper. And we're going to put a little bit of grease on the back side of this jumper right here. Make a mess of it, but I clean it up. And then on the plate itself, where that other side of that spring is going to rest, just a little bit there, and we can go ahead and put this day jumper spring in. And this same process as the ones we've done before, where I get one side of it on in place, and then I'll just use my hold down tool and put tension on it and bring that other side of that spring down. I use my brass tweezers here. I'll use a plastic tool. I try to avoid using any steel tools, tweezers, or screwdrivers or anything, because I don't want to leave a mark on the plate. But there we go. And you can see where I cleaned up that spot of grease from earlier. Now is our cover plate. This is an odd looking cover plate, but it's got some components for the day wheel and the day jumper on it. And it's spring loaded, and that spring is kind of crimped. There's two little, where that spring that's on there is, well, it's crimped into place. So that's a non-removable spring. But it's not supposed to be removed. But I just made sure that cover plate was down all the way, and you can see where it covers the teeth on that date wheel where it keeps it from riding up. Now we'll just do a final tighten on these 3 screws. This little star wheel here has a shouldered screw that holds it down. So I'm putting a little bit of oil on that wheel right there where that shoulder is going to meet it. And then I'm just kind of making sure, being very careful when I screw this in to make sure I don't pinch that wheel and the shoulder goes all the way through it. So that felt good. And then I'm going to go ahead and just do a little test here. And there we go. You can see it's riding in on that shoulder. So that wheel's not binding up, but that wheel is what connects between the date driving wheel and the hour wheel. And that's what drives it. Here we'll zoom in and you see that little white plastic nub as we go backwards, see it kind of go inwards. That's a safety mechanism that allows you to wind this watch backwards past midnight where it won't damage the date wheel or the calendar wheel for that matter. And that's why you've always heard, on a lot of watches, never, wind it backwards or set your time before, a certain time or anything. That's the damage that can happen in those wheels that don't have some sort of safety feature. And there's multiple ways of doing it. And watches today, most of them, I would doubt have that issue, but especially back in the day, you could really damage a watch by doing that. But that one there, since this thing has a semi Quickset that requires you to go backwards, that's the safety feature. Now we just set the jumper for the day wheel, and we can install this tiny, tiny, tiny little clip back on. That's actually that's a blued steel clip. And I guess just the way they have to temper that thing so it can stretch and bend and work as that clip. I'm guessing that's just a treatment they use. But it's a little blued steel, tiny little clip. But there we go. Popped into place. Now we can function test this thing. So I got the crown out to the middle position. There we go. I wound it till the date changed, and now I'm going backwards. You can see it jump a little bit and then go back forwards again and go to the next day. So watch the day wheel. It goes Friday, and then Friday bumps again, and now we can go to Saturday. Watch the Saturday. See, it jumps right. As soon as it makes that jump, you can go back forward again. There's Sunday. So it doesn't take long to get through the dates on a semi Quickset. There's the dial ring, and that fits into a groove on the main plate. Now we can put our dial on. And if I put it on straight, I'd have a lot less problems. Took me a minute to realize it, but there we go. That's how it should look. And now I'm just going to show one screw, but now we're just tightening down those 2 dial feed screws just to secure the dial. And there we go. I'm going to just take some nice, fresh, clean Rodico and lightly go over this thing and make sure that white center part was flawless. So I didn't want to touch it. And so I'm just removing any specks of anything that want to be removed. Just very, very, very lightly. Then I'll just use some puffed air on it as well. Now we're going to go ahead and set the hand. So we want to find midnight. So we're going to turn the time till as soon as that date wheel kicks over. So right there's midnight. And we're going to press our hands on. So I'll show it on the hour hand here. After I put each hand on, I'll rotate them around and make sure nothing's rubbing or touching. And I'm going to check when this thing rolls over, when the date happens, boom, right there. And that's, to my eye, that's dead center at midnight. So that's fantastic. And now I put on the minute hand. You can see it's been a couple minutes since I put the hand on the watch. And when I press it in, it's about 12:04 now. But I double check that again and then put the seconds hand on and just a very light press. That does not take much pressure at all. Now we need to replace this crystal. So here's our old one with its crack and everything else. And I found a replacement crystal with a tension ring in it of the right size. This one was 32.1 millimeters. We'll go ahead and get this thing out of the case. And there you can see old versus new. So before I put it on, I'm just going to clean it with some air, just try to remove any dust particles that are in there. And I'll do that again before we actually put the movement in. But with these are, press fit in and compression fit. So I'm just kind of getting it started on there. Then we'll take it over here, and I'm just going to use the plastic dies on this. This is about the cheapest, you know, crystal press you can buy, but you know what? It works for 85% of every watch I've ever done. So, but those plastic dies make sure we don't mar anything, but I'm still going to use plastic. And I just work this around and rotate it around. And it'll squeeze that in a little bit and press it in. And I just work it around. And when I pull it out, I double check it and make sure that it's seated fully all the way down, all the way around. But there you go. What do you think of that? So now it's time to case this movement. And so you can see I did a lot of work on this case, and I rebrushed the top of it. I put vertical brushing on it because I just like the way it looked. I kind of defined my own line between brushing and polish. But again, I didn't sand this down. I probably could have sanded it and got it even, nicer than it is. But I mean, it's in good wearable condition, and it's fantastic. Macro shows you everything. So there's our gear. And I actually had to order that out of France, and I'm in the central USA. So it took a bit of time to get there, but I found that part. It was cheaper doing it that way than buying a donor movement. But that's a brand new part from in the factory packaging. So now we'll go ahead and get that in, put the stem through it. There we go. And it's going to seat right in those flats. And when that stem goes in all the way, there we go. Now it's in there. So now we can put our movement ring in. This movement ring was actually a pretty tight fit. I kept this I speed the video up just barely, but it was a real tight squeeze, which it's a good thing because when it's in there fully, well, that movement's not going to move at all. So now we can put our automatic works in. So here's that bridge that I did a terrible job of lining up. But there we go. And I'm just going to press it down and rotate the crown in the winding position. And now I'm just testing it, and I'm looking at those reversing wheels, and they're spinning from turning the crown. So that means everything is engaging properly. And we can go ahead and secure this with its 2 screws. And just like everything else, I screw them in, but do not torque them yet until they're both down flush. Just like that. And then I'll go ahead and torque those screws. Now it's time for the oscillating weight. So I'm going to put some lubrication on this post. And if you remember, that oscillating weight had that really weird clip. I haven't run into one of those before, but it does make installing it really easy. So we get this kind of pressed into place, and I'll rotate it a bit for a moment just to see if it engages. And it's actually not deep enough to engage yet, but open up that clip and just press it down slightly and then move it around, and boom, there we go. That easy. That's about as easy as it gets. So I'm rotating it around to make sure nothing's rubbing or touching. I double checked to make sure there wasn't a lot of play in it. That felt great. A little wind test just to make sure that I'm not getting any, helicopter effect due to those reversing wheels, but everything looked great. So now this here is a replacement gasket for the case back. And what I did not show was the gasket for the crown. That thing was a monster to get that gasket out and to get the new one in. Did not get that on video. That took me a while, but the crown got a new gasket as well. So there we put the case back on. And had some light circular brushing on the case back. Again, I made my own little holder to do that because I do not own a lapping machine, which is what you would need to do it properly. So I made my own holder to hold those case backs, in balance, with it spinning without it being out of balance, and just apply my own brushing. But still a technique I'm trying to master without having the right tool, but I think it actually looks pretty good. I didn't want to put too much brushing on it, but you can kind of tell it's real light, but it's clean looking. And, it's kind of a good defined edge on that inner circle. So I'm actually really pleased with how that turned out, considering the machine that takes to do that costs several $1,000s that I am not prepared to buy. I did it with $50 worth of tools. So this here is a 19 millimeter bracelet, and I am very limited on my stock of 19 millimeter bracelets. This is my only one, and I think it looks pretty good. It's a normal size bracelet, so it barely fits me. I need an XL, but I think the watch looks fantastic. So doing one more function check. Double check the semi-quick set for the day. That seems to look like it's working just like it should. The date wheel's jumping over too. So we'll pull the crown all the way out. See if this Quickset works. And there we go. It's only taken us about an hour to get to this point, but there we go. Our Quickset is working. So that's fantastic. And the cool thing about this one, this design, is you can go either way with it. So this is what I did to the case. I think it looks pretty good. It's not perfectly new, and when you're looking at it under macro, you're going to see every little scratch. But polishing's not perfect. There's a few fingerprints on it, but I think it looks pretty darn sharp. And on my gigantic wrist, this watch looks tiny, but I still love it. I may end up getting a different bracelet for it later, or a strap for it, just a longer one. I may end up selling this watch. I don't really know yet, because I've got a ton of watches, but I really enjoyed this project, and I think it turned out really, really well. These old watches, they got a lot of character. And if you just look at this thing, you could say, oh, that's a cheap watch. It's an inexpensive watch, but just look at it. I'm into this watch for under $80 all in, and it's running like an absolute top. It looks fantastic. It's comfortable. It's got a brand new strap on it. And I think it's just great. And that's what these projects are all about. And that's why I love them. So ladies and gentlemen, that is the video. Thank you so, so much for joining me on this one. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you like content like this, I really would appreciate it if you liked and subscribed. And have a pleasant day. We will see you on the next one. Take care.